Ilara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the datapad in her hands, the official request for alliance displayed before her. The grandeur of the Galactic Council Hall seemed to mock her with its cold, polished walls. She had heard tales of the great empires and powerful species that sat at these tables, their reputation spreading across the stars like the gravitational pull of a dying star. With a deep breath, Ilara stood tall and walked toward the podium. Her species, the Varkara, were a peaceful race, known for their incredible adaptability and connection to the cosmos. Their culture revered knowledge, art, and unity. Yet, despite their rich history, they were considered insignificant by the larger galactic powers. The Varkara had never sought war or conquest, traits that made them seem weak and predictable in the eyes of others. But they had much to offer, and Ilara was determined to make them seen. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, Ilara's voice rang out with authority, though her insides churned. We, the Varkara, seek to join the galactic community. Our people have long existed in the shadows, isolated from the vastness of the cosmos. We bring with us wisdom, a peaceful outlook, and an unyielding desire for mutual growth. We ask only for your consideration. A murmur rippled through the chamber, but there was no applause, no sign of recognition. Ilara glanced around at the council members, beings of varying shapes, sizes, and colors, all of whom held positions of power in their respective systems. Many of them stared at her as if she were a curiosity, a species too delicate to be taken seriously. One by one, the council members began to speak. Why should we waste resources on a species that can barely defend themselves? Came a voice from a reptilian leader of a militaristic empire. His cold eyes narrowed as he scanned Ilara with disdain. What do the Varkara have to offer, aside from pretty words and passive ideals? Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She fought the urge to shrink under the weight of their scrutiny. But she had prepared for this moment. She had known the road would be difficult, and rejection would sting. Still, this was her only chance to show that her people were worth something. She took another breath and continued, trying to steady her nerves. We may not be a warlike species, Ilara said, her voice unwavering, but our strength lies in diplomacy, in understanding the needs of others, in fostering peaceful relations between diverse cultures. We are willing to share our knowledge in fields like healing, energy efficiency, and sustainable living. We ask only for a place at the table, a chance to contribute to the greater good of the galaxy. Another murmur swept through the room. This time, it was not one of curiosity or interest, but one of disbelief and mild amusement. Ilara's gaze flickered to the high-ranking officials who watched her like predators circling prey. They had heard her words, but they had no interest in them. They were looking for something else, something more valuable. The cold silence stretched on until a voice broke through. You're wasting our time, Varkara, said the voice of a dark-skinned, humanoid species with a head that resembled a combination of a bird and a reptile. He leaned back in his chair, lazily flicking a long tail over the edge. Your people are not strong enough to stand beside us. We've no use for you. Do not waste our time any further. Ilara felt the weight of his words like a physical blow. The council's laughter, low at first and growing louder, reverberated in her ears. Her heart pounded. Her words were drowned out by their mocking voices, and she felt small, unworthy. Her body tensed, and she fought against the sting of humiliation, but the damage had been done. She had hoped that this moment would be different, that perhaps the galaxy was ready for something new. But the rejection hit her harder than she ever expected. In that moment, Ilara realized how easily a species could be forgotten, dismissed, and discarded. Take her away, a voice called, no longer interested in hearing her plead. This is a waste of resources. Let her learn her place. Ilara's hands tightened around the datapad, but she said nothing. She turned slowly, walking back toward the door as the laughter continued. For a long moment, the sounds of her footsteps echoed in the hollow hall as if mocking her. Every word of rejection rang in her mind, each one deeper than the last. No matter how hard she tried, she would never be more than a passing whisper in the galaxy. The door slid open, and Alara stepped outside, her heart heavy with the weight of failure. The stars beyond the glass felt colder now, a vast and empty expanse that no longer offered any comfort. She had been rejected, not just by the council, but by the entire galaxy. Alone. Once again, Alara floated through the cold, endless reaches of space, her ship drifting aimlessly through the void. The council's rejection still stung, like a deep, unhealing wound. She couldn't escape the mocking laughter, the cold dismissal of her people. The lights of distant stars shimmered outside her viewports, but they felt more like distant, uncaring beacons than guiding lights. In the weeks that followed, Alara had no destination, no plan. She set the ship's autopilot to a distant, uncharted region of the galaxy, hoping that the emptiness might somehow dull the pain. But no amount of silence could silence the questions echoing in her mind. Why had she thought they would accept her? Why had she believed her people, so different from the others, could find a place among them? Her people, the Varkara, had always been outsiders. They were known for their quiet wisdom, their deep spiritual connection to the stars, and their commitment to peaceful coexistence. But none of that mattered in a galaxy that valued power and conquest above all else. The Varkara had never fought wars or sought dominance, and that made them seem weak, naive, unworthy of the galactic stage. But in the solitude of her ship, the pain of rejection seemed even more overwhelming. Every system she passed, every distant planet, reminded her that her species was unseen, unheard, and unwanted. She tried to reach out to other species in the galaxy, hoping that one of them might offer the same warmth and understanding that the humans had shown her, but all her efforts fell flat. The messages she sent were unanswered. The few ships she encountered either ignored her or kept their distance. No one was interested in engaging with the Varkara, and soon Alara stopped trying. She withdrew deeper into her ship, only venturing out to maintain the controls and check the star charts. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. The vastness of space felt more suffocating than liberating. In those long stretches of solitude, Alara's mind began to unravel. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was nothing, just a speck of dust in the endless galaxy. Her people were insignificant, their peaceful ways obsolete in a universe driven by violence and ambition. She thought of her people back home, waiting for her to bring them hope. But what hope could she give them now? What good was a peaceful race in a galaxy that valued power above all else? It was in these darkest moments that Alara's thoughts turned inward. The isolation became a mirror, reflecting her deepest fears and doubts. Was she truly alone? Were the Varkara destined to remain on the fringe forever, never able to break free from the shadow of rejection? As days turned into weeks, Alara found herself staring into the endless expanse of space, wondering if she would ever find the strength to go on. The ship's hum, once a comforting background noise, now felt like a reminder of her solitude, her failure. She'd been rejected by the galaxy, and now she felt like she was rejecting herself. The stars outside seemed to mock her. What was the point of continuing? Why should she keep searching for a place in a galaxy that didn't care about her people? She had hoped for connection, for understanding, but all she had found was coldness. There was no room for the weak in this vast, indifferent universe. And so, as Alara gazed out of the endless void, she began to wonder if perhaps the stars had already made up their mind about her kind. Perhaps, she thought, they were meant to fade into nothingness, just another forgotten race in the grand scheme of the universe. Alara's fingers hovered over the control panel as the quiet hum of her ship filled the cabin. The void outside seemed endless, a vast expanse of nothingness. She had grown used to the isolation, the loneliness that seeped into every corner of her life. The weeks of silence had dulled the pain, but it hadn't erased it. Every light in the distance reminded her of the cold rejection she faced, the emptiness that surrounded her now. She sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the star map in front of her. She had no destination, no plan. It was just her, alone in the dark, adrift in a galaxy that had no place for her or her people. A deep, sinking feeling settled in her chest. It was the feeling of hopelessness, of being forgotten. For the first time in her life, She wondered if the Varkara were destined to remain in the shadows forever. Then the quiet was broken. A sudden beep echoed through the ship's communication system, jolting Alara from her thoughts. It was faint, almost as if it were coming from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. She frowned, instinctively reaching for the controls. She hadn't received a signal in weeks, not since the last futile attempt at contact with the Galactic Council. Surely it was a glitch, maybe just static from a distant frequency. But the message repeated, clearer this time. "You're not alone." The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anything like this, not after everything she'd been through. She quickly scanned the source of the transmission. It was coming from a human vessel, small, lone, and far off the usual routes of galactic traffic. The coordinates were a mystery, a place she'd never even heard of. Ilara's mind raced. Could it be real? Was this some kind of trap, another cruel joke from the galaxy she had come to despise? Or was this a genuine offer, a beacon of hope from an unexpected source? Despite her doubts, she decided to respond. What did she have to lose? If it was a trick, she could always turn away. But if it wasn't? With trembling hands, Ilara activated her ship's comm system and sent a message back. She kept it simple, unsure of how much to reveal. "This is Ilara of the Varkara. Who are you?" There was a long silence after her transmission. Her pulse quickened as she waited, unsure if she had made a mistake. The void outside seemed to press in on her, cold and empty. Then, to her relief, a voice came through the speaker. "This is Captain Liam Hayes of the human starship Elysium. We received your signal, Ilara. You're not alone. If you're willing, we can help." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Human. The humans. She had heard of them, of course, their rise from the ashes of their own struggles, their ambition to explore the stars. But she had never interacted with them. The galaxy had largely ignored them, just as it had ignored her species. Still, their name carried a weight that intrigued her. They had shown an eagerness to engage with the unknown, to stand up for the underdog. But this was unexpected. Could it be possible that a human, someone from a species that had struggled to find its place, was offering her an outstretched hand? Ilara's mind raced. What did they want from her? Was there a catch? Or had she truly found someone who understood her, who saw her as more than just an outsider? I don't understand," Ilara finally said, her voice shaky with the weight of emotion she hadn't expected to feel. "Why would you help me? My people." "We believe in second chances," Hayes interrupted gently. "The universe isn't just made of the powerful, Ilara. The ones who are rejected, those who are left behind, are often the ones who can teach us the most. If you'll allow it, we can meet. I'll come to you." Ilara's mind reeled. Was this real? For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. The cold, empty void outside her ship suddenly didn't seem quite as vast. There was a human offering a chance at something she hadn't dared to believe in for so long. "All right," Ilara said, her voice steady now, though her heart raced. "I'll meet you. But you must understand, my people have been rejected by the galaxy. I don't know if anyone would accept us." Hayes' voice was calm but firm. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. We'll help you, Ilara. You're not alone. Not anymore." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and unexpected. Ilara leaned back in her seat, staring at the comm screen. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was floating in endless space, a forgotten speck of dust. She felt seen. Maybe, just maybe, this human would be the key to the future she had once dreamed of, one where the Varkara could find a place among the stars. Ilara's heart raced as she watched the human ship approach. The Elysium was nothing like the grand, militaristic vessels of the galactic empires. It was small, sleek, with an aura of quiet strength, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of humanity. She had expected something more imposing, more arrogant, perhaps, but this ship felt different. It wasn't here to conquer or dominate. It was here to meet her. to offer something she hadn't felt in so long, understanding. As the human vessel docked with hers, Alara prepared herself for the unknown. She stood in front of the airlock, her mind racing with questions. Why had Captain Liam Hayes reached out to her? What did he want? Could he truly be trusted, or was this some new form of manipulation? But as the airlock hissed open and the figure of Captain Hayes stepped onto her ship, Alara felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Hayes wasn't imposing or aggressive. He wasn't the type of leader who sought to command attention. His demeanor was gentle, unassuming, yet there was an undeniable presence to him, a warmth in his eyes that seemed to invite trust. Captain Hayes, Alara said, her voice tentative, unsure of how to approach him. Thank you for responding to my message. I wasn't sure if it was real. Hayes gave her a small, reassuring smile. I understand. It's a strange thing, this connection between us. But it's real. And I'm glad you reached out. His eyes softened as he looked around the ship, taking in its simple, functional design. You've been alone out here for too long, haven't you? Alara nodded, her throat tight. My people have been rejected by the galaxy. We are seen as weak. I thought I could change that, but the council, they laughed. No one cares about the Varkara. Captain Hayes regarded her with empathy, a softness in his expression that made her feel heard for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I've heard of your people, Alara, he said quietly. I've read about the Varkara and your culture. You're not weak. You're misunderstood. Alara's chest tightened. I don't know if we'll ever be understood. The galaxy doesn't want us. Every species, every government, we're seen as a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst. Hayes stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. I've seen that happen before. Species pushed aside because they don't fit the mold. Humanity itself faced that kind of rejection not too long ago. We were considered too small, too divided to ever become anything significant in the galaxy. But we fought, we grew, we united. And we learned that what matters isn't how others see you. It's what you do with your time, your choices, your will to move forward. You can find your place, Alara, and I can help you. Alara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. The galaxy, for all its coldness, didn't have to be the final answer. There could be more. There could be hope. But why? Alara asked, her voice trembling. Why would you help us? Humans have their own struggles. Your people have fought so hard to get where you are. Why would you spend resources on a race like mine? Hayes smiled again, but this time there was something deeper in his expression, a quiet strength that Alara could feel all the way down to her bones. Because we've learned that strength doesn't come from what you conquer, but from what you protect. The galaxy can be a hard place, but we've seen that it's worth the fight when we stand up for the ones who don't have a voice. We're not so different, you and I. The Varkara might have been pushed aside, but that doesn't mean you're done. You've just begun. Alara felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't a grand solution, but it was a start. For the first time in months, she could see a path forward, one that didn't lead to isolation. She wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, but she whispered, unable to find words for the gratitude that filled her heart. You don't need to thank me, Hayes said. This is just the beginning, Alara. We'll take this one step at a time. Together. The moment felt like a turning point, a fragile thread of hope that, for once, didn't feel like it would snap under the weight of the universe's indifference. Alara knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, that there were still many obstacles to overcome. But with Hayes and the human crew at her side, it didn't feel impossible. The stars outside her ship no longer seemed as cold, and the vast expanse of space didn't feel as empty. For the first time, it felt like there was a place for her. There was a place for the Varkara in the galaxy, and perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy would learn to see the strength they had always possessed. Days turned into weeks as Alara and Captain Hayes began to build a connection, slowly forging a bond between their two species. The Elysium became a temporary home for Alara, a place where she could begin to see the galaxy in a new light. The crew of the human ship, once cautious and unsure, had warmed to her presence, offering small gestures of kindness that Alara hadn't expected. They shared stories, ate together, and slowly began to understand that the Varkara were more than just a race of outsiders. They were survivors, people who had endured and persisted through countless challenges, holding on to their ideals in a galaxy that didn't always appreciate them. Ilara spent much of her time in the Elysium's communications room, studying the star maps and reading through the galactic archives. With Hayes' guidance, she learned about the different species and factions that populated the galaxy. The more she learned, the clearer it became. The galaxy was as fractured as it was vast. There were countless civilizations, each with its own culture, struggles, and histories. But it wasn't just the Varkara who had been pushed aside. Many other races had suffered similar fates, either because of their size, their ideals, or their lack of military strength. Some had faded into obscurity, while others had fought to survive and rebuild. "You're not alone in this, Ilara," Hayes had told her one evening, after she had expressed doubts about whether the Varkara could ever truly find their place. "There's more to the galaxy than power struggles and war. There are people, species, out there who want peace, who want to build something meaningful. You just have to find them." It was a thought that had stayed with her, and it gave her the courage to continue. The galaxy might have rejected them once, but she could no longer accept that as her people's fate. There had to be a way for the Varkara to prove their worth, not through force or domination, but through unity, diplomacy, and understanding. As the weeks passed, Ilara began to send out messages to various factions, smaller groups she had come across in the star maps. She spoke of the Varkara's ideals, of their peaceful nature, their commitment to knowledge, and their willingness to help others. The responses were slow at first, almost non-existent, but Ilara didn't give up. Each message was a small step toward building trust, toward creating a network of allies who might someday help the Varkara stand on their own. The humans were instrumental in this process. They gave her advice, shared their own experiences, and offered to broker meetings with some of the less aggressive species. Through their guidance, Ilara learned how to approach negotiations, how to make her people's voice heard in a galaxy that seemed determined to silence them. Slowly, she began to see progress. Small victories, like a message from a neutral species expressing interest in meeting, began to trickle in. One day, as Ilara sat in the ship's observation deck, watching the stars pass by, Hayes joined her, his footsteps light as he approached. "How's it going?" he asked, standing beside her and looking out at the same stars that had once seemed so lonely. Ilara smiled, though it was a small smile. "Better. I've received a few responses. Not much, but enough to show me that there are others out there who might listen." "That's all it takes," Hayes said, his voice filled with encouragement. "One person, one species at a time. The Varkara are capable of more than they realize. You've got the right people around you, Ilara. You're not fighting this alone anymore." Ilara's gaze remained on the stars, but inside, a fire began to burn. She had been rejected by the galaxy, but perhaps this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. The road to unity would be long and fraught with challenges, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had seen what could happen when people worked together, when species looked past their differences and saw the potential for something greater. For the first time in a long time, Ilara felt that she wasn't just drifting through the galaxy, forgotten and abandoned. She had a purpose. She had a mission. And with the help of humans like Captain Hayes, the Varkara would no longer be ignored. The stars outside seemed a little brighter now, no longer just distant points of light in an uncaring void. They were beacons, guides that could lead her people to a future where they could finally stand tall, proud of who they were. It was a future that was no longer beyond reach. "Let's make sure they hear us," Ilara said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Let's show the galaxy what the Varkara can offer." The following months were a whirlwind of preparation. The initial responses Ilara had received were tentative, cautious, but they were a start. Slowly, she began to forge alliances, building a network of species who were open to hearing the Varkara's message of peace and unity. Some were small, isolated factions that had been ignored by the galactic powers. Others were former empires that had fallen from grace, now looking for ways to rebuild themselves without resorting to violence. Ilara found hope in every message, every conversation. She had come to understand that the galaxy wasn't entirely lost to the clutches of power-hungry conquerors. There were others who believed in something more, something better. Captain Hayes and the crew of the Elysium were at the forefront of these efforts, their support invaluable in making contact with these species. While Ilara was the one who initiated the conversations, Hayes's presence and the human crew's reputation were instrumental in earning the trust of those they contacted. Humanity, despite its own tumultuous history, had proven itself a beacon of resilience and growth. They weren't perfect, but they understood what it meant to rise from hardship. They knew that change was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. As the weeks passed, the small alliance of species Ilara had begun to form started to grow. They shared knowledge, resources, and mutual support. The Varkara's peaceful ways resonated with those who were tired of the endless cycle of conflict. They realized that strength didn't just come from military might. It came from the ability to work together, to build something greater than individual empires or warlords. Ilara spent long hours in the Elysium's communications room, reading and replying to countless messages. Sometimes the responses were short and cautious, but other times they were filled with the promise of cooperation and shared goals. Each message that came through felt like another small victory in a battle that was not fought with weapons, but with words and trust. One evening, as Ilara finished composing a response to a particularly important message from an influential neutral faction, she felt a presence at the doorway. Looking up, she saw Captain Hayes standing there, his expression thoughtful. "You've made a lot of progress," he said, stepping into the room and leaning against the doorframe. "I've been watching how the messages are flowing. You're starting to build something real." Ilara smiled, though her eyes remained fixed on the screen in front of her. "It doesn't feel real yet. It's still so fragile. So many species are still hesitant. They've seen too much violence, too much destruction. They're scared." "I get it," Hayes said, his voice soft. "But that's why what you're doing is so important. You're showing them a different path. A path where they don't have to keep fighting, where they can work together instead of tearing each other apart." Ilara turned to look at him, her heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. "But what if I fail? What if the Varkara fail? We've been rejected by the galaxy before. What makes this time different?" Hayes walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you're not alone anymore, Ilara. You've got allies now. You've got people who believe in you. And that's what makes all the difference." His words sank deep into her heart. For so long, she had carried the weight of her people's future on her own shoulders. She had been convinced that she had to bear the burden alone, that the Varkara were destined to be outsiders forever. But now, surrounded by people who believed in the same vision, she could feel the strength of their unity. They were building something together. Ilara stood and faced Hayes, her resolve firming in her chest. "Then we need to take the next step," she said, her voice steady. "It's time to bring this alliance together, to show the galaxy what we can do." Hayes nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're ready. Let's make it happen." And so, the decision was made. Ilara sent out an invitation to all the species in her growing network. A summit, a gathering of minds, a place where they could sit down and discuss how they would move forward, how they would create a new kind of future, one where peace was possible, one where the Varkara's voice could be heard. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Ilara felt something stir within her that she hadn't felt before. Hope. Real hope. Hope that the galaxy could change, that her people could find their place, not as outsiders, but as equals among the stars. As the message went out, she looked out the window of the Elysium, staring at the stars that now seemed less distant and cold. There was a chance to build something lasting, a chance to prove that peace and unity could be more powerful than war and division. And Ilara, once rejected and alone, was ready to lead the way. The summit invitation went out, and with it, a glimmer of possibility. Ilara couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she awaited responses from the species she had reached out to. The stakes were high. This was the moment where everything she had worked for would either take root or crumble under the weight of fear and doubt. The Elysium sailed through the stars, carrying with it the hopes of the Varkara and their newfound allies. The summit would take place on a neutral world, a lush green planet called Therion, where representatives from various factions could meet without the shadow of any one empire looming over them. The planet had long been a symbol of peace, a sanctuary for those who sought diplomacy over conflict. It felt like the right place to begin this monumental step. As the ship neared Therion's orbit, Ilara stood at the observation deck, gazing out at the vastness of space. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Would the species she had reached out to actually come? Would they trust her, the Varkara, enough to show up? And even if they did, could she convince them to work together, to build something better than the broken galaxy they had all inherited? "You look like you're carrying the weight of the stars," a voice behind her said, drawing her out of her thoughts. Ilara turned to find Captain Hayes standing there, a reassuring smile on his face. He had been by her side through every challenge, every moment of uncertainty. And in that moment, she realized that he had become more than just an ally. He had become a friend. He had shown her that it was possible to stand up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. "I am," Ilara admitted, her voice quiet. "This is more than just a meeting. It's everything we've been fighting for. The future of my people, the future of the galaxy. It all depends on what happens next." Hayes stepped closer, his gaze steady and supportive. "You're not alone in this, Ilara. You've got more people on your side than you realize. If we can get this right, if we can show them what's possible, then it won't just be your people's future that changes. It'll be the galaxy's." Ilara nodded, drawing strength from his words. She had come so far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The representatives from the various species would arrive soon, and she had to be ready. She had to be the one to unite them, to show them that peace was not only possible, but worth fighting for. The Elysium settled into orbit around Therion, and soon the first ships began to arrive, small, unassuming vessels carrying representatives of species Ilara had only read about in old texts. There were the Ilarian, a race known for their intelligence and deep connection to the natural world. The Narathi, a species of peaceful explorers who had long avoided the galactic conflict. And then there were the Croshed, a species that had once been a mighty empire but had fallen into disarray, seeking a new way to rebuild. As each ship landed on the planet's surface, Ilara felt a surge of nervous energy. These were the beings who could change everything. They could be the first step toward creating something new in the galaxy. The gathering took place in an open pavilion on Therion's vast plains, surrounded by towering trees and the distant peaks of mountains. The air was thick with anticipation as Ilara stood at the front, flanked by Captain Hayes and a few trusted allies. This was her moment. This was where she had to prove that the Varkara, and those who stood with them, were capable of more than what the galaxy had believed. As the representatives took their seats, Ilara stood before them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for coming. This is the first step towards something greater, a galaxy where peace, cooperation, and unity can exist. We have been divided for far too long, and now it is time to change that. I stand here not just as a representative of the Varkara, but as someone who believes that the future of the galaxy doesn't have to be shaped by war and destruction. Together, we can build a new future." The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty, but Ilara didn't falter. She had come this far. She had faced rejection, isolation, and doubt. But this was her chance to show them that the galaxy didn't have to be defined by division and hatred. And then, one by one, the representatives began to speak. They expressed their concerns, their hopes, and their doubts, but as the discussions continued, something remarkable began to happen. There were no arguments, no shouting. Instead, they listened. They heard each other. And slowly, the walls of distrust began to fall. The summit wasn't going to solve everything in one day, but it was a start. The seeds of change had been planted, and Ilara knew, as she looked around at the diverse faces gathered before her, that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was starting to listen. And for the first time, the Varkara were no longer invisible. The summit on Therion was unlike anything Ilara had ever experienced. What started as a gathering of uncertain, cautious representatives had transformed into a vibrant exchange of ideas, a forum where real change was not just a possibility, but a growing reality. Each species brought their own perspectives, but instead of division, there was a palpable sense of shared purpose. Ilara had done it. She had brought them together. The discussions weren't easy. There were disagreements, moments where the old scars of the galaxy's conflicts seemed ready to resurface. But for every harsh word spoken, there was an equal commitment to understanding. And that, Ilara realized, was what mattered most. They were listening, truly listening. They were learning that unity didn't mean erasing differences. It meant respecting them and finding strength in diversity. Captain Hayes, who had been by her side throughout the summit, saw the change in her. Where once she had been filled with doubt, now she stood tall, the weight of her people's future no longer a crushing burden but a shared responsibility. He knew this wasn't just a victory for the Varkara. It was a victory for all of them. The Varkara aren't alone anymore, Hayes said quietly as they watched the summit unfold from a balcony overlooking the pavilion. You've given them a voice, Ilara. You've given the galaxy something it's been missing for a long time. Ilara turned to him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I think it's more than just a voice. It's a chance for all of us to build something different, something better. The discussions continued late into the night, and as dawn broke over Therion, the representatives emerged with a joint statement, a commitment to work together to foster peace and cooperation across the galaxy. They agreed to form a new coalition, one that would seek to bridge the divides between the warring factions, to offer aid to those in need, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The Varkara, once rejected by all, had found their place among the stars. Ilara stood before the assembly one final time, her voice filled with emotion. This is just the beginning. We have taken the first step toward a galaxy united in peace. But there will be challenges ahead, and there will be those who will try to tear us apart. We must stay strong, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that will come after us. As she finished speaking, a roar of applause erupted from the assembly. It wasn't just a moment of triumph for her or the Varkara. It was a victory for all who believed that the galaxy could be a place of cooperation, understanding, and shared purpose. As the summit concluded, Ilara found herself standing on the edge of Therion's Great Plains, looking out over the vast horizon. The stars above no longer felt cold or distant. They felt like a reminder of how far they had come. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in her life, Ilara felt that the future was full of possibility. We've done it, she whispered to herself, her heart swelling with pride. The galaxy was changing, and for once, it was changing for the better. The Varkara were no longer outsiders. They were an integral part of something bigger, something that could reshape the course of history. As she turned to leave the summit grounds, Captain Hayes approached her, a knowing smile on his face. Ready to see where this goes? Ilara smiled back, her resolve as strong as ever. I am. Let's go make sure the galaxy never forgets what we've built. And with that, the two of them walked back toward the Elysium, ready to face whatever the future held. Together.